wonder if you've ever had that experience of not knowing where you are or where you are going. I remember when I was about 7, I used to love riding my bike, and I was riding through the suburbs, and this particular day I got lost. That empty, gut-wrenching feeling. You feel the anxiety build up, and as you just keep riding, you believe, hey, if I just keep riding and riding, eventually I'll find my way home. But the surroundings, they never looked familiar, and I just got more and more lost. Eventually, I got home. Thank goodness. For some of us, it's not so much that we don't know where we are, but perhaps we struggle to know who we are. We struggle to understand what's happening in our lives and what we should be doing. We may know our postcode, our neighbourhood, our daily routine, but inwardly, we are lost. When we consider the backdrop of this story here in Luke, the divine message of Jesus rising from the dead had been divinely revealed to Mary Magdalene, Mary, mother of James, Joanna, and other women from Galilee who were followers of Jesus. This wondrous message was then shared by these women to the 11 and all the other disciples. And at once they rejoiced and started praising God, thanking the women for this glorious news. Not. The 11 closest followers of Jesus doubted and speculated. Surely this news is nonsense. Peter runs off to see for himself and finds the grave was in fact empty. The apparent gobbledygook had now become gospel. The alleged poppycock now a point of fact. Jesus is not here. This must mean he's alive. I don't know about you, but sometimes we only accept those things that make sense to us. If we can't understand something, we tend to reject or deny it. In some ways, it's natural to struggle to comprehend the incomprehensible. The grave is empty. What does this mean? And this is the point where this story on this dusty road to Emmaus begins. A story of 2 unremarkable travellers headed back towards an inconsequential town. 2 disciples of Jesus who had heard the claims of Mary but couldn't grasp what it meant. Maybe they were afraid to hope and believe in a speculative, incredulous notion. If I believe he's alive and he's not, I don't think I can cope. For them, Jesus had been dead and buried only days ago, along with their hopes and dreams, it seemed. They were headed away from Jerusalem, away from the others, perhaps to escape the scene of this crime, to get as far away from the tragedy and trauma as they could. They knew where they were headed, but inwardly, they were lost. Hurt, confused, disillusioned, they walked and talked, striving to make sense of what had happened. Jesus was crucified. The grave is empty. What does this mean? Jesus was absent from the grave, yes, but not yet present with the disciples. So who were these travellers? These 2 disciples of Jesus? Well, we don't really know. Just a single name, Cleopas, is revealed. The disciple Cleopas, who is never mentioned anywhere before this or anywhere thereafter. This brief and fleeting mention actually draws us to the real focus of the story. That we are not meant to recognise these disciples, but that we would know that they came to truly recognise Jesus. Is that the focus of our story too? That we would come to recognise Jesus. As they walked towards Emmaus, engrossed in conversation, absorbed in uncertainty, the 2 disciples encountered another traveller. I wonder, have you ever been involved in a sensitive conversation with someone, then a random stranger comes up and listens and begins joining in? What did you do? Awkward, silent moment. Exchange pleasantries and small talk to be polite, and then let the overly friendly guest know that it was great to meet them, but you're going through some really tough stuff and you need to get back to talking privately with your friend. Well, we see here as the disciples encounter this apparent stranger that it isn't socially awkward, but rather strangely familiar. Incredibly, they don't recognise that it's Jesus, and yet they are at once at ease and comfortable to engage with him. It's a bit of a joke in our family that I suffer from a condition called facial blindness. Many times on a train or when I'm out in public, I seem to recognise people, or think that I do, and call out to them thinking it's a certain person when in actual fact it's not. On some occasions, thank goodness, my wife has intervened so that I haven't been too foolish or embarrassed myself. Well, these disciples don't suffer from any clinical condition of facial blindness. Rather, Luke tells us that they were kept from recognizing Jesus. Kept from recognizing Jesus, a man that they had seen daily for years. What a weird and peculiar idea. The beauty of peculiarity is that it invites exploration. Is Luke actually telling us that God kept them from recognizing Jesus, the very person that they were desperately hoping to see? Their eyes were veiled. Why? Well, I think in the same way that Pharaoh's heart was hardened by God as a means to have Pharaoh's true motives exposed and actually give him over to his clandestine intentions, kind of God's way of combating falsehood and pretense. Well, in a similar vein here, the disciples' eyes being veiled from recognizing Jesus outwardly actually enabled them to engage with Jesus, albeit unknowingly, in a much deeper way. As they conversed, understanding grew. The truth of the risen Jesus took seed in their heart. Open the eyes of my heart, Lord. I want to see you. The experience of the disciples can also be paralleled to what would happen for Saul years later as he walked on another road. The road not to Emmaus, but to Damascus. Saul, the hyper-vigilant persecutor of Christians, encounters the divine Jesus and is blinded. But in losing his sight, he actually begins to see who Jesus truly is and devotes his life to him. These disciples couldn't recognize Jesus outwardly because they needed to have their hearts and minds renewed as they listened and genuinely encountered the living Christ. To move beyond their grief, confusion, and distorted, unfulfilled expectations of who they thought Jesus was or wasn't. To move beyond the surface, to truly see and understand. I wonder who struggles to do that, to look beyond the surface and the superficial, as it might relate to God, ourselves, or others. Who is Jesus to you? As Jesus speaks to the disciples here on the road and brings fresh revelation of the story of God's enduring faithfulness and salvation, their hearts were strangely warmed. They were brought to a place of deeper understanding, their minds renewed. Where there was confusion and doubt, Jesus was bringing clarity and hope. The vision of this apparent stranger perhaps becomes a little more familiar as he speaks to them, yet they still do not recognize him and see him fully. So when did they see that this stranger was actually Jesus? Having arrived at Emmaus, the disciples asked Jesus to stay with them for the night. In these intimate moments, as they all recline to eat and Jesus breaks bread, the veil is no more. They see Jesus truly for who he is, the promised Messiah, the resurrected Lord. Friends, we see Jesus most clearly in what he says and what he does, just like any of us. Jesus is the Word of God, the fulfillment of the law, the way, the truth, and the life. As we walk along the road, as we share our fears and concerns, as we listen, Jesus brings us revelation and understanding. As we recline and commune with Jesus, our eyes are at once opened, the veil is removed. So friends, are you lost and confused today? Do you feel as if you're walking along a road, but really headed to nowhere? Know that Jesus walks with you, and he takes us from the place of nowhere to somewhere, on a journey of new life, new hope, new purpose, where once we were lost, but now we are found. Jesus is our lamp unto our feet and a light unto our path. The journey of recognizing and coming to know Jesus is an ever-evolving one. May we learn to listen and open our hearts. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. In all your ways acknowledge him and he will make your paths straight. May we be found in his presence, breaking bread, and come to truly see. May the eyes of your heart be opened, and may you recognize the way, the truth, and the life that is Jesus.
In the blood of Calvary.